with respect to whether they go over the one-time annual exclusion. And that's something that the parties have to check with a tax accountant about, because they don't. If they exceed the one-time exclusion, then it would be partially taxed.
Can the vacating spouse force the other spouse to refinance if it wasn't part of the divorce process?
No.
They cannot.
No.
In your experience, what is the length of time that these things have taken? In your experience, if they during the divorce process, one of them is required to refinance, how long can this drag on?
Well, we see in Fairfax County the cases typically lasting for approximately a year. And the reason being is that once the divorce is filed, the process with respect to the court is that the timing and the dockets place the case out for about a year.
Okay.
Now, in that time period, the parties hopefully are working diligently to try to resolve the property issues.
Okay.
And in fact, 95% of the cases are eventually resolved without the need of going to trial or going to a court.
If children are involved and there's a custody battle going on, how does that play a role in who making the mortgage payment if both of them are in the property?
Well, if children are involved, the judges obviously would like to see the children protected.
Okay.
And they are a little bit more liberal when it comes to making people do what's needed to protect the children, and especially putting a roof on their heads.
Okay.
So they may, in fact, tax the parties financially greater than they might if the children weren't involved, just to make sure that the house is still intact and the children have a place to live.
Investment properties. How is that divided if one of the spouses keeps the house and say they bought investment property together? How is the judge going to handle that?
Well, it's the same manner with the marital residence, and that is that it's a piece of property. It's part of the marital estate.
Okay.
And the judge looks at a balancing technique, where if one party gets one asset and it has a value and the other party gets another asset that has a value, they try to balance it out.
Okay. If there's an investment property with a third party interest in it, how is the judge going to alleviate that?
Well, that creates an interesting issue and an interesting problem sometimes. The simplest way to deal with that is the property is appraised, and if the parties, meaning the husband and the wife and the investor or the number of investors, have equal shares of the property, then the court can identify each party's share. And if one of the parties wants to retain that investment property, then they would pay the other their share of the equity.
Okay.
If neither party is able to buy into the investment, for lack of a better way of putting it, then there's going to be a debt created by that investment property. And they would both have to agree to sell their interest to the investment.
Okay. You hear in the news today about there being a short sale. And during the divorce process, and say the short sale is all complete and done, and the lender comes after the short sale process, if the lender comes back after the couple, how is the judge going to handle that, or is that between the two parties?
Well, first of all, with respect to the short sale, at least it's my understanding, that the short sale has already been given the good grace of the bank. In other words, they're accepting the contract and they're going to accept a certain amount in lieu of what was owed.
Okay.
Now, sometimes that short sale can result in an actual amount that the bank will accept in lieu of the full amount that was due. And that would be a debt created by the marriage.
Okay.
In other cases, the bank forgives it completely. Now, in the event that the bank forgives the debt completely, there's an issue that may arise, and it has to do with taxes.
Okay.
And that is that the IRS considers a forgiving of debt as income.
Okay.
And a jointly owned piece of property that is forgiven debt, both parties are going to be equally responsible in the eyes of the IRS.
Okay.
Now, if for some reason, and I've seen this, although I don't quite understand the accounting of it, sometimes the banks do not issue a 1099, and they don't claim it on their books as far as a loss, or some fashion don't claim it such that it becomes a forgiven debt for the investor, for the property owner. And at that point in time, there is no event that would be taxable.
Okay.
If the bank issues a 1099, which is the way that the bank indicates a forgiving of debt, then the IRS is going to know about it, and the parties are going to have to claim that forgiving of debt on their tax returns. So we have something that's been sanctioned by the lending company and accepted by the lending company. So now what we have is a deficiency, for lack of a better word, and that becomes a marital debt. And the deficiency is dealt with by the court in the same fashion that is dealt with property, and that is they have the right to divide the debt so long as it's marital in any fashion that they deem equitable given the circumstances.
Okay. What in your opinion is really the best way to handle the mortgage? Is it all in the separation agreement? Should the two parties try to come to an agreement on how the house is going to be handled before they get to you, or is that something you help negotiate?
Well, sometimes people have already negotiated and resolved that issue as well as a lot of issues before they come to me.
Okay.
More times than not, as I indicated, the issue is resolved by virtue of negotiations through the attorneys or through another process, mediation or negotiation. And that's always the best way to handle any portion of these cases, is to try to get the parties to understand what their responsibilities are, what their liabilities are, and come to an agreement on that. And that way the parties know what they're going to be getting themselves into, as opposed to having a judge tell them what to do.
Right. It's of your preference so that they have these things agreed. You'd rather not take this into a court of law and have it drawn out in court in a big court battle. Is that correct?
I would not prefer to go to court over any of these cases, because we have many judges and they all have different feelings and they all have different positions on things.
Right.
So we're never sure what's going to happen when we go to court. But when two people can agree, even though both of them may not be happy with what they've agreed to, but if they agree, then at least they know what they're going to have to live with.
Mark, are there any other possible ramifications of a short sale?
Yeah, there is one ramification that I've seen recently, and that is that the banks, in negotiating the short sale,
Okay.
assuming that the short sale includes a payment back to the bank of some amount, say they accept $30,000 when over $200,000 was owed, and the parties agree to pay that $30,000 over time. In some of the agreements that I've seen, the bank has, as part of the agreement, a party's prohibition, or a prohibition against the parties actually entering into another mortgage loan until they're paid in full.
Okay. Okay.
And that's important for people to understand, because they think that they got a short sale and now all of a sudden they can go and buy another property. But if they do that, they become in default, and then they owe the bank the entire amount that was forgiven.
I see. I see. Now, before the divorce is resolved and in the event of a foreclosure, how is that deficiency handled?
Well, if the house has been foreclosed on, then we do have at that point a judgment, which is a debt. Okay. And the debt would be addressed in a similar fashion as with other debts in the marriage, although assuming that the parties don't have the assets to cover the debt, and the court understands that requiring one of the parties to pay that debt would really be a hollow judgment. Okay. The most likelihood is that the parties will end up having to go bankrupt. Okay. To avoid the deficiency.
Will an ex-spouse, if there are other divorce assets involved, can the ex-spouse use that to alleviate them having to make the mortgage payments?
They can use marital assets to pay the mortgage during the period of separation, as long as the payments are for that purpose. In other words, it's a marital purpose, especially if the children are in the house and the parties want to keep the children in the house, the roof over the head. But it's important to understand that a party does that, and as long as they're not marshaling their own assets and spending the marital assets, then there wouldn't be any negative repercussions.
What happens in the event that one spouse just takes off, just leaves? Will that ex-spouse, is the ex-spouse and their name is not on the title, can that ex-spouse be held liable for the mortgage payments and the deficiencies?
Well, if they're not on the title and they're not on the deed of trust, which is the loan, right, then the only thing that can be done is through the court. In other words, the judge could require either party who vacates in a manner that is not appropriate. They can require either judge to contribute to the mortgage. Okay. Whether they do so or not is another issue, depending upon the finances and the circumstances.
Have you ever experienced where one spouse can take the other spouse's name off the mortgage without their knowledge of it? Have you ever come across a case like that?
I have only come across cases like that when the papers that removed the spouse off the mortgage were done in a manner that was fraudulent.
I see.
And the one spouse forged the other spouse's name, because the loan companies, assuming that you're not talking about having the the initial loan refinanced. If you're just talking about one of the spouses trying to take the other spouse's name off the mortgage.
Okay.
I haven't seen that done successfully, at least in a fashion that was appropriate.
Mark, I know you're busy, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Mortgage Solutions. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Remember, if you would like to apply for a mortgage loan or just have some questions in regards to mortgage loan, please visit our website at markrigney.org. If you have questions about a divorce and your mortgage, please contact Mark Astor. His phone number will be listed on the screen below. We will read and answer some of your questions on our next show. On behalf of myself and friend Mark Astor, thank you for watching Mortgage Solutions. We will see you next time.